Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story. It is a Wednesday and we're in the book of Luke, chapter 15. Each day we tackle a single relevant question based on our Bible reading that day. And so this week we're in the book of Luke, and Luke chapter 15 is our reading today. I'm joined by Alyssa Bream and Zack Unkenholz, and so we're going to ask this one question. So Luke 15 in the New Testament is one of my favorite stories, or has been. You know, it's weird. I should say, I don't want to say it's less important, but there were seasons in my life where it was much more dear to my heart, because I related to being lost. Because this is kind of the lost chapter. In it, we find 4 lost. I hear people say 3 sometimes, but I always read it as 4. Mm-hmm. We have the lost sheep, we have the lost coin, and then we have 2 lost sons, 2 sons who are in different places for different reasons. And in my opinion, Jesus doesn't tell multiple stories to bring the same exact point. I think he's telling multiple stories to give different. It's like looking through a prism. Okay, I can see how this affects this and this looks here. So the question that I have today is, what is the difference between the lost things in these stories? What is Jesus trying to say by talking about the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the 2 lost sons?
I think one of the big differences is how they were lost, because the lost sheep was stupid. Sheep are pretty stupid from what I've heard.
And coins are not stupid,
And the coin got lost by no fault of its own. Obviously, that woman knocked it off, dropped it, did something.
Carelessness by somebody in the house.
Right. Mm-hmm. And then the lost son is someone who thinks they're smarter than their others' wise advice. They think they're just and he goes off and, willingly runs away. And then I think the older son is kind of the cranky old Christian that
thinks he's better than everybody
right,
else.
Thinks he's better than ever.
Self-righteous.
Right, and he doesn't think he's lost.
Right. Yeah.
But he is.
Yeah.
And so I think there's all these, we see people in life that are harmed by no fault of their own. They grew up in an abusive environment and things like that. But then we also see people who had every chance and they've made really wrong decisions.
So let's talk about each one separately. What are some... I would describe it as careless, that sheep. Carelessness. What are some... Maybe there's a better word. Maybe you guys have a better word than careless. You use dumb, stupid. I think, that
can probably describe sheep, but probably shouldn't describe humans.
I know some dumb, stupid people, and I've done dumb, stupid stuff, mm-hmm. I mean, we all have, if we were honest about it. But what are some careless things where we just wander away? Because that's what happens. He just wanders away on his own, and something caught his eye. What are some ways that people wander away? That's how I would describe it.
I think sometimes when life is good, you're just going with the current. You're not realizing that, it's kind of like if the grass is good here, and continue to eat the grass. You're going along, and then you realize, wait a second, I'm not with everybody else. With the sheep maybe, or for us, I think that sometimes life can just be going good. We're kind of on autopilot, and it's not until we face a dilemma or we open our eyes that we realize how far we've strayed from where we were before, or the kind of life we were living, or the way we should be glorifying God. And so I could see that as a possibility.
Yeah, I think, like Zach said, the grass being greener over there, but I just think for humans, kind of getting stuck in your own head, and there's the idea that has been playing in my head, and it's been kind of talked about in different places I've been and things I've read, and is that idea about getting stuck in your own head where you're constantly overanalyzing yourself and you're just worrying about like, wait, why did I do this? Because, oh yeah, it must be because this happened to me, and da 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 da. And you're gonna get stuck in that. And I think that that can lead you astray down a path of like, oh, if I just fix this and this and this, then this would be fixed. And I think you can get stuck in that overanalyzing state, and that's not even being stupid. I think that's almost being too smart for your own good.
The places I see, at least the places I've seen in my life where I've been distracted, it could be relationships that turn your eyes away from, and you just wander off. It didn't start out, you didn't expect. It could be a career. People think, okay, this job is going to be good for my family, and then they turn and it consumes them. It's the only thing they can see, because at least the way I understand what happens to sheep is they get tunnel vision, kind of. They get their eyes on one thing, and they wander off after that one thing, and they get lost, and somebody has to go find them before they get hurt. And
Have you seen the sheep that when they have gone so long and they have matted fur and then they fall over and they
Right.
can't get up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because nobody's taking care of them.
Right.
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 They haven't been tended to. But our eyes get deviated. There's an old hymn that I love called "Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus." Because there are so many things, and in the world we live in, there are so many things trying to get our attention.
Mm-hmm.
So many things trying to get our attention, and 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 if we're not careful, it will cause us. I don't believe that, for example, the lost sheep won intentionally. I don't think that's what Jesus is trying to say. I think Jesus is trying to warn, okay, you get distracted and you wander off, and before you realize it, you're lost. You don't set out to be lost. You didn't take that job to be lost. You didn't start that relationship to be lost. You didn't whatever, to be lost. That's just where it ends up. It's like, I hear people talk about corrupt preachers. My experience is that there probably were some that started out with ill intentions, but for the most part, most of them start out with good intentions. But something distracts them, and then they start down this path, and there's almost no return once they get down there. They just keep going, and so they become lost. But the lost coin is different. The lost sheep strays away, and it becomes obvious to everybody inside that they're no longer on the inside. But with the coin, it is accidental at the hands of someone else. It fell off. Somebody bumped a table, it got knocked out. There's 1,000 things. So what is the message here? Because I think about the kingdom of God, and because my life is consumed by the local church, I think kingdom in terms of the local church. And, there's some danger in that too, okay? But what are some ways that people get misplaced inside of the kingdom? What are some things that happen to cause people to be misplaced inside?
Most of what I'm thinking of is probably more applicable to the church, getting misplaced in a church rather than in the kingdom.
But I think that's okay, because the local church is a microcosm of the kingdom of God. It's a small picture of it. Just like the family is a picture of a bigger unit. But what were some of the examples you were thinking of?
I mean, I can think of people who, when they join a church, they just kind of can't find the right small group. They feel like left out. Maybe they haven't taken the steps they need to find community in that church. And they just kind of stray away, and just it becomes not an important thing because they don't find what they need in that church.
Or I even think of like when maybe you have someone who has gifts and abilities, but they aren't given the opportunity to use those gifts in the church, and they don't find purpose, and that also too. So I think that's like, for what Alyssa was saying too, it's one of the reasons why we push so heavily that, we want you to volunteer and we want you to find a life group, because in those ways you're going to find community. It's really hard to get lost when you have people that you work with, people that you share life with that genuinely care about you and want to see you grow closer to Christ. And
Yeah, and I heard Rick Warren because he was kind of, in my opinion, he was like the father of the small group movement in churches. But his comment frequently was, every church has people that fall through the cracks. He says, if you fall through the cracks here at Saddleback, you wanted to fall through the cracks because we have things in place to keep you from falling. If you volunteer, getting in a life group, you're not going to fall through the cracks. We call them life groups. They call them small groups. And I do think people fall through the cracks unintentionally, except maybe I think people intentionally fall through the cracks more than we realize. They didn't want to be connected, and they come in, then they disappear, and nobody notices because that was just the way it was. The things I was thinking about were more than gifts, talents, and abilities, because for the most part, if people have gifts, talents, and abilities and they want to serve, we let them serve for the most part. There are some exclusions to that where they can't, for numerous reasons, but for the most part, we want people to serve. The things I thought about were what in modern terms would be described as maybe even as church hurt, where people were offended or hurt, because I can think of times when even I had done or said something that people had taken a specific way, and I didn't notice it. By the time I noticed it, they were gone. They had completely kind of dissolved in the equation. And when I was able to go back and I sought them out, and they explained, they said this happened, and it could have been a misunderstanding. It could have been a conflict. Not necessarily with me, because most of the time, if there was a conflict where I'm concerned, I'm aware of it. But it could have been a conflict with someone else that I didn't know about. Those kind of things that are the things that I see happen, and people get lost in the church. They get overlooked. They don't pay attention to, and sometimes, historically, this could have been also gender related. It could be age related. The churches I grew up, it was more likely to be age related than it was gender related, for the most part. But where people just are ignored and not paid attention to, and then you don't. Before long, they're discouraged, disheartened, have fallen away. They may still come to church; they're just not active, And those are the things I think about in the local church, or in the busyness of church life. Sometimes people fall to the wayside, and we're not careful enough to know it. And the truth is, as good shepherds, we should be paying attention and try to rein that in. But I don't know. Y'all have any other examples? If not, we'll move on to the two lost sons, because most Bibles, the header says the lost son. But I've always read it as two. They both have a problem. And previously, we talked about this probably last year sometime, about a year ago, maybe we would have discussed this passage. And I had heard someone share a thought that I had not heard previously, where this was addressed. And he said the difference between the younger son in this story than the older son and the coin and the sheep was he intentionally left. He announced, okay, I've had enough. I'm out of here. And so out of the four, he's the only one that is not sought after. And I'd never seen it that way.
Mhm.
That's a real. For me, I've reviewed this story. The shepherd looks for the lost sheep. The woman looks for the lost coin, and even the father goes out and finds the older son when he's out
Mhm.
pouting. But he doesn't go find the younger son. He has to wait on him to come back. And I don't know if that is a sign from God, something we should put into practice. I just don't know. So I'm going to share an example with you that I think of when I think of this. There was a lady I knew, and her son was raised in church. All of her kids were raised in church, and there were rumors that one of this particular son was homosexual, but they were just rumors. That's all they were. And eventually, his dad died. He came out public. He went public with that he was gay. And I was in a setting with this lady, and the conversation evolved to where I felt like, okay, I can ask this question. And I asked her. I said, "What did you do? How did you handle this? When he came out?" And she said, "Well, he came to my house, and he told me, Mom, I'm gay. I'm going to get married." And she said, I was distraught. She said, "But I set him down. I took him to the kitchen table." She said, "I took my Bible and I opened my Bible." And she said, "I read to him everything in Scripture that I believe spoke against that and why he was making a sinful choice, a wrong choice." And she said, "I closed my Bible." And she said, "Since he left that day, I've never mentioned it again." She said, and these are almost her exact words. She said, "Because one day he's going to come to that realization himself, and he's going to have somewhere to run to. And if I close the door and I make life difficult for him," she said, "I won't be where he runs." And she says, "I want here to be a place where he'll come back to." And I've processed that 1,000 times trying to figure out, because I don't know what I would do. I'm not lying to you. I don't know what my response would be. But I thought, gosh, that reminds me so much of the prodigal son's father. That's what he did. He said, "Okay, you know, I feel confident he told him he was making a mistake. This probably isn't the wisest thing. The Bible doesn't tell us that, but I feel confident any father's going to do that." But then he let him go off and waste it. But when he came back, he was there waiting for him. And as the church, I think more of us in the church are the older son. We're the self-righteous, who does he think he is coming back in here? Kind of, we identify with that. I have been the lost son, the one that ran away and come back. But the further I get from that, the more likely I am to be the self-righteous, son. But I think we struggle. We want to beat salvation into them or correction into them when I'm not sure that that's the right model. That's what I'm processing right now about this. If they leave, tell them, give them all the advice you want to give them. Tell them they're making a mistake, but don't let that be the conversation every time you see them. Don't let that be the conversation every time you talk to them. Don't use it as a club to beat over their head. Let them know where you stand, and then love them so that they have a place to run. Because if the church beats them to death, they're never going to run back to the church, for healing when they come to that realization. And so, I don't know. Do y'all have any input on that?
That's really good.
Have you ever found yourself as the self-righteous one?
Yeah, I think I've definitely been there before. Because I think it's so easy to compare ourselves to others, and to think that and even we talked about this also in Luke 2 of thinking, well, at least I'm better than blank, I'm better than whoever. It's that's not how we as Christians. I mean, we all sin, we all fall short, and I think sometimes I see people who have success in areas that I don't, and I think why don't I have that? or God, why haven't I been blessed in this way? And I need to realize that I'm blessed beyond anything I could ever deserve, and I'm very loved. And so I'm humbled by the story of the prodigal sons.
Whenever I'm frustrated that other people have received grace in things, I have to remember I didn't have to go through that pain.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's what
And
I
what
have to
with that
remind
shame?
myself.
Yeah, and what with that shame that
Mhm.
whatever people are walking with. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue our conversation around the book.